Hey everybody, welcome to Gossip Finance. I'm Duncan Stanlin. Sorry I've been sick for a week, so we're back now. Wanted to do something kind of fun today. Fun-ish. I had a couple emails, people asking me about the Joe Rogan thing, and we've made fun of him a few times because he's kind of an idiot. But people were asking me what's going on with that in the election. Well, he did endorse Donald Trump. A lot of young men voted for Donald Trump. That was kind of a big swing for him. Especially since Gen Z tended to be more liberal, and then that was kind of a big shift. And a lot of it was a lot of young men decided, that they voted because they saw Donald Trump or heard Donald Trump on Joe Rogan's podcast. But to kind of get into what happened here and what's going on, I kind of wanted to cover this. Ali Velshi did a bit here, and he was covering this book called Fearless Speech, and I just want to cover a couple quick clips from this just to get a taste of what's going on here. Because what's really happening is Joe Rogan got bought out by billionaire, a couple billionaires. But that's what happened. But I want to sort of set the stage here. So here's Ali Velshi.
Trump's election win, along with his cabinet picks, who's who of unqualified loyalists and a handful of conspiracists, only underscores that the real winner of this year's election was the algorithm. It's only intensified the debate over whether the First Amendment's protections are adequate in a world where the proverbial town square is monopolized by wealthy elites. Our current understanding of the First Amendment's free speech clause comes from early 20th century Supreme Court decisions, including one from Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, whose famous concept of the marketplace of ideas, the theory that a free and open exchange of ideas will allow the best ones to prevail simply on their merits. But that theory has been increasingly tested in the digital era, where information is filtered through algorithms deliberately engineered to prioritize profit or perhaps nefarious messages over truth. And arguably, the First Amendment falls short because it was never intended to protect those who can't afford the megaphone. Justice Holmes' famous assertion that there is no such thing as a false idea, which went on to influence later cases and supports a maximalist approach to free speech, meaning the more speech, the better.
Well, and Holmes, that was his position on it. But Velshi's right. If I own the press, then I get to decide kind of what you hear, what information gets to you, which allows me to control propaganda, which is a lot of what happened recently in the election, is who controlled the megaphone. And a lot of the social media stuff was controlled by the right, because that's where all the money was. So we're going to get into this. He's talking about this woman's book, but I wanted to get into just this section here.
Has been despised and violently suppressed throughout American history. In the 1830s, for example, abolitionist literature, one of the first radical speech movements in America, was violently suppressed by Southern legislatures. The 1873 Comstock Act banned content related to women's sexuality and reproductive health under the guise of protecting public morality. That law, by the way, is still on the books and could be used against women again very quickly. Black Lives Matter protesters were tear-gassed and jailed. According to Franks, quote, the First Amendment's mythical status as the uncompromising guardian of free expression for all is the product of historical revisionism, selective attention, and limited imagination. What has been protected in the United States above all is not fearless speech in the service of equality, but rather reckless speech in the service of racial and gender hierarchy. While great strides have been made over the centuries to transform Americans' false claim of democracy into a true one, the original ruling class has done everything it can to resist this. The values of white male supremacy and the speech that reinforces them have always received heightened protections in our society.
And so I think that's a great point, because historically, when you talk about the abolitionist movement to get rid of slavery, heavily suppressed by the wealthy, especially slave owners, right? You can see why, women's rights, heavily suppressed by the wealthy that didn't want that. Talking about just the civil rights movement, heavily suppressed by the press and the wealthy that owned it. People forget these things. Everybody thinks about Martin Luther King Jr. being all peaceful and everything, but there were a lot of riots involved with his protests and his marches. And the other thing that was involved with that is they blamed him, right? And they did this whole "he's no angel" thing. All the same shit they did with Black Lives Matter, they did to MLK. It's all recycled. It's all old shit. So the question then comes down to like the what happened to Joe Rogan thing, right? Well, here I want to clip Luke Beasley, who was asking this same question recently too, and I saw this while I was researching this.
Tuning into his podcast sometimes and hearing a guy who was open to different point of views and who often was more skewed in the liberal direction, but of course had his more culturally conservative streaks because of UFC and eating an all meat diet at some point and stuff like that. But it wasn't the overt pro MAGA stuff that we're seeing all too often on his massively influential podcast now. And so again, the big question that people will ask is what the heck happened to him? And you have to see this video that was put together, a compilation of old Joe Rogan. And you'll see a couple minutes into it, him just destroying Trump for the reason that I beg people to go after Trump for. And he does it in that sort of Joe Rogan type of way, just casually going, no, Trump's like terrible. And what happened to that? I'll explain. We'll go through it. But first, let's watch this. While you are, please do click that subscribe button.
I really believe if Michelle Obama runs, she wins.
She's good.
She's great. She's the wife of the best president that we have had in our lifetime. I've never voted right wing in my life. I consider universal basic income a really good idea. I want free college education.
Take it easy.
Hello, Bernie.
How are you, Joe?
Wonderful. Pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I like Tulsi and I like Bernie. That's it.
Oh, yeah?
Everybody else can eat shit.
Look at you, fucking progressive.
Yeah. I think I'll probably vote for Bernie. I think he's looking out for the interests of the working people. And I think he wants people to have a better life and do better. And I'm all for that. And if that means I have to pay more in tax, like people think, oh, you're a socialist. I've heard people say that. Oh, you're a fucking socialist, bro. Like, first of all, he's not even a socialist. He's a democratic socialist. It's a different thing. I would like to spend more in taxes if they could fix inner city communities and take these poor neighborhoods and throw a fuckload of them. Spend more, you fucking Republican piece of shit. 87% of scientists said that human activity is driving global warming. I'm very pro-choice. I'm very women's rights, civil rights, gay rights, trans rights. I'm even universal health care. Obviously, this protected status is driving me crazy. This thing that Trump's doing with children that were born in other countries and then brought over here as children, and then they're talking about deporting them. That drives me fucking crazy.
Yeah, that's
that kind of shit. And the hard right version of that is despicable. These people that I see online, why didn't they apply for citizenship? Oh, who knows? Maybe because they're fucking 13. I don't give a fuck if they broke the law. You don't take parents and kids and separate them. You just fucking don't. You know Alonzo?
No, who's that?
A funny comedian.
Yeah.
He goes, not all Donald Trump supporters are racist, but all racists are Donald Trump supporters.
He definitely awakened that side.
But the January 6th thing is important.
See, it is important,
And
but is it the 6 months later? Should be the ruling number one conversation of a journalist?
I think it's really important. And one of the reasons why I think it's important because it highlights the reasons why a guy like Donald Trump is so fucking dangerous.
So, as you can see, he talks about Donald Trump being dangerous. He is upset about him taking children with the border. He's upset about them trying to deport the Dreamers, the DACA kids. He used to be pro-LGBTQ trans rights. He used to talk about how he was good friends with Eddie Izzard, who's, I don't know that he was transgender, but he's definitely transvestite. But yeah, I mean, talks about all this stuff. And very, very left-wing. Universal income, free college. Now he's absolutely against all this, huge Trump supporter. What happened? Because this was 2018. What happened between 2018 and now? Well, actually, it started to happen back in 2020. And the thing that happened in 2020, well, he started getting on these guys from the intellectual dark web guys that ended up all being, hacks and crazy conspiracy theorists. And his views started to go up, and then he got a huge contract, $100 million contract from Spotify. So he went from being worth $3 or $4 million to being worth over 100 overnight. And Spotify is owned by two billionaires in Sweden. One of them, Daniel Ek, is really famous for a paper he wrote in Sweden where he wants to lower the tax policy so he can overwork and underpay his employees. I mean, I'm not kidding you. He wrote a paper about that in Sweden. That's who he works for now. That's who's writing his paychecks. So now, that's what happened. You want to know, how does a guy go from being 46 and liberal to being all of a sudden he's 48 and he's a right-wing nut job and he doesn't care about deporting children, and he bashes trans people all the time now when he used to be a big supporter, and he's big pro-Trump. I don't know if Joe Rogan has, daughters or anything, but he's supporting a rapist. There's what changed? $100 million. That's what changed. He sold out. The guy doesn't have any spine. That's basically the whole thrust of this. I've got some more stuff we're going to go through, but here's Luke Beasley talking about it some more, but that's essentially all that's gone on here. He got bought out. Now, is he doing it on purpose? Is he a grifter? I don't know. I don't really care. I think he's mostly just an empty vessel. I think he'll regurgitate whatever the last person said to him if he gets paid. And I don't think he cares who he hurts in the process. I don't think he thinks about it. That's what I think he is. He's a useful idiot.
We talked about this before, NBC News. Voters who say they follow politics closely lean more significantly Democratic. So you have follow closely goes 5 points in Democrats' direction. For do not follow politics closely, you are 14 points in Republicans' direction.
So that, I think, is the thrust of the argument here. Is what was the influence that he had, and why was that important to the election? People that don't follow politics closely, a lot of these younger people, they're getting it from podcasts. People in their 20s. They don't read the news, they don't read the papers, they just see the podcast. And so all they know about Donald Trump is what they saw on Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan kissing his ass and endorsing him. And that's all they know. And that's how they voted. People that follow politics closely tend to vote Democrat. People that don't, that know nothing about what's going on, tend to vote Republican. Why? Because they control that space. That's why it's such a big point. That's why he's talking about there's a difference between 5 points if you follow it closely, 14 points if you know nothing about it, because they control all that space. And the reason is because it's guys like Daniel Ek, who owns Spotify, who's worth billions of dollars. So he's going to push his interests on these shows. That's why all the top shows in Spotify, all the top podcasts are all conservative. It's like Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson. You go down the list, they're all conservative. So I think there's maybe one, like Call Me Daddy. I think is the only one that isn't. But for the most part, they dominate that space, and then they get a ton of money. So that's what's going on when you talk about the election and what's going on with Rogan.